Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kernahan Webb. I am a professor here in the Law and Business Department in the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University, and I'm also the director of the Ryerson Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are making a return visit, welcome back. Today is December the 13th, 2016. We are in Toronto. I'm mentioning that because while you're all here and you know that, this is going to be made accessible after the fact, and there are also people patching in from around the world now, and so we need to ground things. This particular talk is part of a series of talks which the Ryerson University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility is holding and has been holding for several years now, all with the goal of better understanding issues associated with corporate social responsibility. The underlying dynamic for all of these talks is one of constructive engagement. That is to say, we're all here to learn. None of us have got the market cornered on how to do things right. And so if we all approach this particular discussion and all of the other discussions in that spirit, it will tend to lead to optimal learning from all parties concerned. This particular talk is co-sponsored by three excellent student organizations. One is the Ryerson Corporate Social Responsibility Student Association. Another is the Ryerson Commerce and Government Association. And the third is the Ryerson Law and Business Student Association. And they are fantastic student organizations here that are able to kind of carry forward a lot of the discussions that we have in class outside of the class in a more kind of relaxed and informative approach oftentimes than we're allowed to do in the compressed structure of the class. So I highly commend these groups for their support and all of their activities, and I urge you to support them as well. This particular talk is also supported by two external organizations. One is the CSA group, the Canadian Standards Association group, which is a non-governmental organization that develops standards, sustainability standards, health and safety standards, electrical standards, you name it. Oftentimes those standards end up being incorporated into laws, but also oftentimes they are very effective outside of the formal legal system. And the CSA group has come to recognize the value of these sorts of talks, and we appreciate their support. And secondly, this is also supported by the Trade Commissioner Service of Global Affairs Canada. So Global Affairs Canada is the department at the federal level of Canada that's responsible for external affairs, external relations, and within the Global Affairs Canada, there's a particular office, the Trade Commissioner Service, that has offices around the world, and their job is to essentially promote Canadian businesses around the world when those Canadian businesses are also behaving properly. So they have a lot of interest in the CSR file, and we appreciate their support as well. So before going any further, I wanted to just bring up a kind of a formal point, and that is that this event is being live broadcast and will be recorded later, and as a result, there may be opportunities from time to time during the course of the talk when the camera will pan the audience. So this is essentially to give you notice of that and notice, and we will consider it to be consent, that you're okay with having your likeness recorded. For those of you who are not in the room now, but are patching in, I say hello to you. I know we have people patching in from as far away as China and England and Chile and other parts of Canada and other parts of the world, but those are the ones that already had preliminary contact that are patching in. And I would just like to say to all of you out there that if you do have a question during the course of the presentation that occurs to you, if you could email me, my email address is listed there, then I will do my best to fold your questions in with the questions that come from the floor, and we will do our best to have those responded to by our two excellent discussants. So moving beyond these technical details, let me say a word, first of all, about the mining sector and corporate social responsibility. This is the Corporate Social Responsibility Institute, and the mining sector is, I would suggest, the extractive sector in general is the sector where corporate social responsibility issues have most directly come into play. It's very true that it doesn't matter which sector you are in now, whether you're in the apparel sector or the food sector or manufacturing of IT, it doesn't matter which sector you're in, you will have a significant labor, environment, social issue of one sort or another. That is for sure. That is assured. That having been said, the extractive sector tends to be the one where basically the rubber really hits the road. And that is because typically the extractive sector involves large companies going to outlying regions of the world, be this in Canada or in other parts of the world, where there typically is very little significant industrial activity, and indeed where, for example, the mining company might be the first such sort of incursion into an otherwise more sort of conventional lifestyle. And so there's tremendous potential for there to be conflict between the interests that are pursuing exploration and development of a particular resource and the local population. And indeed, oftentimes the local population is indigenous, and as you probably all know, around the world, indigenous populations have been, A, very poorly treated for significant periods of our past, and B, are at a significant disadvantage, typically in terms of education, access to resources of all sorts, and so on. So oftentimes there's this really significant conflict when the mining sector comes into contact with local communities. And for that reason, what has emerged over time is increasing recognition by companies and by governments and by non-governmental organizations, et cetera, that unless there is a way that that mining company can break bread with and find common ground with that local community, there is considerable potential for conflict. Conflict taking the form of violence, conflict taking the form of active opposition, taking the form of legal opposition, and that is something that neither the mining sector wants, nor local communities want, nor do governments want that. So the question is, ultimately, what can be done about that? Well, whatever can be done about it depends at first instance on us understanding what exactly is going on. I know some people say that we've moved into an area of post-truth, but universities and related institutions are devoted to using good objective information in order to better understand problems, because when you better understand a problem, you're in a better position to effectively address it. And certainly this particular study that is going to be discussed here today is a good example of an attempt to do just that. So I'm going to leave it to our excellent speakers to talk about this is a two-part research endeavor that they're involved in, and they've only completed the first phase, and this is a report on the first phase. But I will say that this particular research is supported by a Canadian organization known as the Canadian International Resources and Development Institute, CERDI for short. And I will say that I have a minor involvement in this particular study as a kind of advisor, reviewer of the process, but I did not do any of the direct research. We have two of the lead researchers for that here to tell you all about it, and they are Tony Andrews and Bernarda Elizalde, two people that I've had the good fortune to work with for some time now, and they are very well qualified to take you through the first phase of this work. I'll just say a few words about both of them. They are the principals and co-founders of something called the Center for Responsible Mineral Development. And Dr. Andrews is a geologist by training and a specialist in the application of responsible mineral development and social responsibility concerning natural resource development. He was formerly the CEO of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, and spearheaded with Bernarda Elizalde, who's our second speaker, the development of something called E3+, which is a voluntary approach towards addressing CSR issues in the exploration industry in Canada. And it's sort of a well-recognized initiative here in Canada, along with the Mining Association of Canada, which represents kind of the senior, a grouping of the senior mining companies in Canada that also has got its own voluntary approach to addressing CSR called Towards Sustainable Mining. Bernarda is a recognized specialist in environmental stewardship and social responsibility applied to natural resources development with 18 plus years of field experience across Americas, working with mining companies, host governments, international institutions, Indigenous peoples, communities, and civil society organizations. So without further ado, I want to pass things over to Tony and Bernarda. Thanks very much. So it's ready to go. I'm just going to put it in a slideshow. And then here you go, right here.
So thanks, Kernahan. Thank you for inviting me to present this research material here today. It's a great event that you organize, Kernahan, and it's nice. I've been to quite a number of them, and it's nice to be standing here looking out at you rather than sitting in the audience watching somebody else. So, and thanks for coming, everybody. This talk is fresh off the press. I haven't got it completely embedded into this gray matter yet, so every now and then I'm going to be referring to my notes, so bear with me on that one. So the title of this talk that went out to you originally was CSR and Conflict. That was the first notice that went out, and I made a request to Kernahan to change that to the title here, The Rising Conflict Associated with Mining, What Lies Beneath. And the reason I did this, I'm going to take an opportunity here. It presented me with an opportunity to say something about CSR. Certainly CSR is going to be part of this presentation, but it's one element of it. The presentation as a whole, as you will see, is a lot more than CSR. And I become somewhat uncomfortable with the way that term has evolved and is being used. People are putting various spins on it. They're stuffing all kinds of things into the definition. And it's lost some clarity and definition over time. At least that's what I believe. So what I like to do to bring back some clarity and definition is to talk about it in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the various players. So CSR, as the name implies, is focused on the roles and responsibilities of companies, the industry as a whole, and the value chain that serves them. But there are other important players in this space, as illustrated here, and each one of them have their roles and responsibilities with respect to the central goal, which is sustainable, responsible mineral development. So exactly the same can be said about conflict. Certainly companies have a role to play in the generation or prevention of conflict. But there are other players, important players in this space that also have their roles and responsibilities with respect to the generation or prevention of conflict. So if there is an underlying theme that goes right through this presentation, I would say it's collaboration. So the collaboration of the various players to reach the goal of responsible, sustainable mineral development, and the collaboration of all these players also in the creation or prevention of conflict. So this study involved the collaboration of a whole bunch of people. And the first thing I'd like to do is to thank the Canadian International Resources and Development Institute, CERDI, for supporting this project financially. And CERDI is supported in turn by Global Affairs Canada, which is a department of the federal government. So the successful completion of phase 1 of this study was based on the expertise and knowledge of the conflict project team. And here they are. They consist of Ian Thompson, who used to be with On Common Ground, but is with Shinglespit Consultants. Philippe Lebilon, who is with the University of British Columbia. He's with his head down there, so you can't really see him. He was really responsible for the literature review aspect of this study. David Reyes, who's with Triple R Alliance, and he was our African field specialist. Bernarda Elizalde, who is here and is with the Center for Responsible Mineral Development. She is our Latin American field specialist. And Chang-Hoon Oh, who's with Simon Fraser University, and he's the guy who's the expertise on our quantitative analysis. We also had a lot of help from project assistants. Marta and Jonathan were our PhD students at UBC, and they did a lot of the grunt work on the literature review. Maria Jose and Hector and Rames are all local field professionals that helped David and Bernarda in the field work. And we had an excellent external review committee, and I have to say that Kernahan Webb was a member of that, and I want to thank Kernahan very much because he's here and he helped a lot with his comments on the developing reports, various components of this study. So, what I'm going to talk about today is summarized here. I'm going to start with some words describing the project rationale, and methodology, and approach. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about conceptual models that came out of this study. And this will become more clear when we get to it. Then we'll talk about the results from the individual study components. We'll do some summary of observations and conclusions. And then Bernarda will take over and come and talk to you more specifically and with more detail about the Latin American case studies. We're not going to do the same thing for the African case studies because that individual is not here. So we're taking advantage of Bernarda's presence here today. Whoops. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So the purpose of this study is to delve beneath the surface manifestations of conflict in order to develop a deeper understanding of the root causes, systems, and pathways of conflict, what is driving its dramatic increase, and the players involved and their roles and responsibilities, and hopefully evolutionary trends that have happened in the characteristics of conflict over the past 20 years. I'm going to go back to this slide. What motivated this study was a study that was finished and completed by the International Council on Mining and Minerals in 2012 and 13 and was published in 2015. And it showed this rather startling trend of almost an exponential increase in conflict over the period 2002 to 2013. And the initial descriptions of why this trend was happening that was given to me was that it reflected a decline in the practices, the social practices of companies. And I frankly did not believe that. And so what I believed, and I still do, is that this was just the tip of the iceberg, and there was a heck of a lot underlying what we were seeing in this pattern. And in fact, that early description of why this trend was happening really told me that we knew very little about the process of conflict associated with mining. So we started out with some premises, and that is, the first is that due to the very nature of the mining industry, the potential for conflict is high, and therefore it's a normal aspect of the relationship between mining companies and their stakeholders. Conflict is the result of the interplay of multiple actors, not just one actor, sometimes maybe two, but more often than not, multiple actors. And it's a process with a history prior to outbreak. It doesn't just start with conflict outbreak. And conflict is a process with the potential for both positive and negative outcomes. So what we hope to do is improve our understanding of conflict. For example, conflict as a process, including its determinants, the players involved, and their roles and responsibilities. And conflict as an inhibitor or as an enabler, because it can be an enabler. And we'll hear more about that. So on the basis of that improved understanding, improve policies, practices, and tools for conflict prevention, mitigation, and management. And finally, the development of a continuously updated database on mining and conflict case studies that others can use as well in the future when they are interested in this topic and studying it. So our study is focused on community-level social conflict associated with the large-scale mining sector. What it does not include is a focus on conflict minerals, artisanal and small-scale mining, or labor-related conflict. Those elements may be included in some of the case studies that we take on, but they're not the main reason why we choose them. So we had to develop a broad definition of conflict, which includes both negative and positive outcomes. So here's our definition. The interaction of two or more parties with perceived incompatible goals, and the word perceived there is important, who engage each other through a range of practices, including dialogue, persuasion, negotiation, arbitration, legal action, protest, intimidation, and physical violence. So there's a range of there going from the positive to the negative, as you can see. So we also believe that the lessons that can be learned from conflict cases can come from conflict with negative outcomes, conflict with positive outcomes, and conflict situations that simply manage to avoid conflict. So what I'm trying to say here is that we're not just focused on the negative outcomes of conflict. So our study approach is quite ambitious and combines these three individual components: a literature review, a quantitative analysis of existing databases of conflict incidents, and 18 field investigations. So we consider the field studies to be the real heart of this project, whereby we have the opportunity to get on the ground and get in direct contact with the situation and the people involved. We are relying on the literature review and the quantitative analysis to provide a valuable high-level perspective with the ability to look at and analyze a relatively large number of cases, so numbers in the hundreds. So this study, as Kernahan already mentioned, is organized into two phases. So at this stage, we have completed phase one, which we'll be reporting on today, and focusing on the literature review and the 4 case studies that we've completed at this point. I'll not be discussing the quantitative analysis at this time because the bulk of our work completed to date has been in compiling and aligning and upgrading the existing documented conflict incidents into a new global conflict database, which will then be ready for analysis. This has been a very labor-intensive process, but by the end of it, we will have a unique database of about 700 documented conflict cases from about 2000 to 2014. And this will constitute the quantitative analysis aspect of the study. So, what we will be providing to you today is a progress report of our study, and we hope to commence phase 2 in 2017, and this will consist of the bulk of the quantitative analysis and 14 additional case studies. So a significant result of our phase 1 study was the emergence of 2 conceptual models, which are fundamental to the way we are now starting to understand conflict associated with mining, we being the conflict team. And I have decided to do a little bit of a reversal of the normal sequence of things today by introducing these 2 concepts ahead of the evidence from our investigations that actually gave rise to them. I believe this order of presentation will help you assimilate the information more readily, especially from the field study investigations. Anyway, I'm sure that you will let me know whether this has been effective or not once I am finished. So, most conflicts at the community-company interface, most conflicts manifest at the community-company interface, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are sensu stricto company-community conflicts. Our study shows that such conflict outbreak is usually far from being the first chapter in the story. In fact, it is usually preceded by a much longer history of events and players. So our first model is a conceptual framework designed to understand this history and pathway and clearly illuminate the process involved. We employ a terminology for the conflict determinants as illustrated on the right-hand side of this diagram. This terminology is useful not only for defining the various stages and causes of conflict, but also enables examination of the various players involved and their interrelationships. This is a systematic approach which also allows for comparative analysis of multiple case studies. The conflict determinants form a hierarchical structure in terms of space and time, which progressively narrows as we proceed from the top to the bottom. So at the highest level are structural factors, which are global to international extent, sometimes national. They are long-term in duration, and they may be described as generic and foundational. They don't necessarily have a direct connection to industry and industry activities. Yeah? You can't hear me if I wander away? Okay. Oh, that's right. We have people on web. Okay, so the next level down are contextual factors. In that case, the extent is national or subnational. The duration is medium to long term, and they encompass specific conflict cases within the country. Next, we have conflict drivers or inhibitors, we'll see in certain cases. They are local to regional, short to medium term, and they tend to propel specific conflict cases. Then finally, we have conflict triggers. They are local, case-specific, short-term. They are often an event, and often they form the tipping point where you have conflict outbreak. So this is a hierarchical structure that decreases in space and time as you proceed from the top to the bottom. There is interconnectivity and sequential causation from one layer to the next. The hierarchy is not a one-way street, but the flow is predominantly from top to bottom. Some conflict determinants are interchangeable from one layer to the next, and in particular, it seems that this happens between contextual factors and conflict drivers. And there are players that predominate in their influence at each of these levels as illustrated down the left-hand side of this diagram. Significantly, host governments are implicated at every level, but are of singular importance at the contextual level. Companies and communities predominate at the company-community interface, which is where the conflict inevitably manifests. So the conceptual framework provides a strong sense of the substantial history and pathway that can precede conflict outbreak at the company-community interface. This history and pathway can also be illustrated on this figure, which shows in a simplified diagrammatic way the development of the conflict process over time. The existence of structural and contextual factors lay the groundwork for the existence of long-term tensions and the breeding ground for the emergence of conflict drivers, depicted here by the red arrows. Conflict drivers can propel the conflict intensity to conflict outbreak, precipitated by highly variable and unpredictable triggers. In this way, the structural and in particular the contextual factors form the enabling environment for the creation of conflict or the prevention of conflict. And the role of host governments is critical here, as you will see later. Differences in structural and contextual factors give rise to case-specific drivers. And the conflict drivers, combined with historical and cultural factors, give rise to the reactions and behaviors of the players involved at the community-company interface. Our second model, developed by Ian Thompson on the conflict team, was designed specifically to document and understand the reactions and behaviors of the players at the community-company interface and why conflict outbreak usually occurs. We refer to this as the normative model because it is based on two normative components for mining-related conflict that we observed in our 4 case studies. Okay, so these normative components are the extent to which local communities believe that their interests are being respected and protected, the horizontal axis in this figure, and they go from low to high, from left to right. The second one is the degree to which local communities believe that they can influence companies and governments in order to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. So that is the vertical axis going from low to high, from bottom to top. So in this way, we can define the 4 quadrants shown in this figure. And this in turn produces 4 categories of community reactions and behaviors in response to the particular structural and contextual factors that defined the history and evolution of the conflict that they're facing. So these quadrants define corresponding fields, each containing 2 related behaviors. I hope you're going to be able to follow this because it is a bit complex. So the whole right-hand side of this figure falls under the field of coexistence, containing 2 types of related behaviors, both a form of coexistence, so dialogue, collaboration, and passive acceptance. The left-hand side of this is the field of resistance, and there are 2 types of related behaviors here. They're both in kind of a negative side of things, activism and passive aggression. The bottom half of this field is labeled containment, and this contains 2 related behaviors again, passive aggression and passive acceptance. So I'm sure that the last few slides have been a lot to absorb, but don't worry, I'll be coming back to this. So now I'm going to summarize some of the selected key observations from the individual case study components. And you will notice that we use the conflict determinant terminology consistently throughout the reporting of our observations, and that is structural and contextual factors, conflict drivers, and triggers. And we recognized at the very early stages of this project that we were going to need to develop a nomenclature, and this is the one we agreed to. What we didn't realize at the time was that it was going to evolve and eventually form the basis of this conceptual framework. So, the literature review involved looking at a little over 300 publications, and 80% of these were from academia, 11% from civil society organizations, 5% from industry, and 4% from government. And the academic and civil society organization publications, they tend to seek to explain conflict and with a frequent focus on voices and interests of the communities, as it says there. This is quite distinct from the industry and government publications. They tend to focus on good practice guidance and advice to extractive companies on how to avoid conflict. We thought the literature showed a bias in the sense that it tended to focus on Latin America compared to other regions of the world like Africa and Southeast Asia. But we later discovered from the other components of our project that this in fact was actually reflecting reality, that most of the conflicts are occurring in Latin America at this time. So when you do a literature review, you also look at the strengths and weaknesses of the literature dealing with this topic. And in terms of strengths, the majority of the publications are based on case study analysis, which is a really good thing. And there's moderate detail over a large number of cases. And they cover a large historical and geographic scale. So this is exactly what we were looking for in the literature review, and this is going to be enhanced by a quantitative analysis as well. But there are weaknesses. There's a frequent lack of clearly defined variables in the literature, which make it a little bit difficult to come to generic conclusions across the whole universe of cases. It's often presented from the perspective and interests of communities and non-governmental organizations, and that's where you have the bulk of the publications coming from academia. And really importantly, I think there is a great paucity of studies from industry. And this is a significant gap because there has been a lot published, or I shouldn't say published, there has been a lot of work done on by industry and for industry on the subject of conflict associated with the mining industry. However, this is a massive gray literature. It's all in confidential files and it's inaccessible. And this is a shame, but that's the way it is, and there's not much that can be done about it at this time. So the literature review report is about a 60-page document and contains an enormous amount of very useful information. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on three main observations as listed here. So first, the rise in conflict coincides with the global commodity boom. And the global commodity boom, as most of you will know here, was marked by an unprecedented rise in demand for commodities from about 2003 to 11, driven mainly by China, and a corresponding unprecedented rise in exploration and mining activity worldwide. You will recall the figure on the left, which shows the dramatic rise in conflict incidents associated with mining during the period 2002 to 2013. And this was resulting from the ICMM study that I mentioned before. And as mentioned previously as well, initial interpretations of this rather startling trend was that it indicated a decline in industry social practices, which I will remind you that I did not accept. However, when we compare this figure to the figure on the right, showing annual global exploration expenditures over the same period, it became obvious that this dramatic rise in conflict was directly related to the increase in industry activity. What is noteworthy here is a remarkable similarity in these patterns, right down to the sharp dip in industry activity during the global liquidity crisis in 2007 and 8, followed by the impressive recovery in 2009, which is clearly reflected in both of the diagrams. Seen in this light, the conflict data, rather than reflecting an unexplained decline in industry social practice, demonstrates that the level of conflict is highly sensitive to overall industry activity, When the industry activity expands, so does conflict frequency and vice versa. This seems like a fairly simple observation, but you would be surprised at how unappreciated this relationship is. Conflict determinants, I should say I've skipped. No, I'm good. So the second observation from the literature review is that rise in conflict correlates with a broader rising trend in large-scale protests globally. So they happen at the same time. This rising trend in conflicts related to extractive sector activities, it appears to be part of a broader rising trend in a number of large-scale protests globally. As illustrated in the highlighted area of this graph in the middle of this slide, protest intensity in recent times reached a new and high plateau commencing around 2003 in comparison to the previous 2 decades of relative calm that preceded it. The data suggests we are again approaching the 1980s protest levels when causes of social turmoil ranged from Cold War tensions to anti-apartheid sentiment. So as the World Economic Forum has well documented, social stability is being challenged by multiple profound transformations in the world at this time that have paralleled globalization and have affected most countries worldwide. And as most of us are aware, social instability is being driven by a combination of factors as illustrated here on this slide. So, if you will recall, the Occupy Together protest took place in 2011, and this picture shows the one that was happening in Montreal. But what's quite interesting here is that this shows how the Occupy Together protest spread around the world. Note that it has significant uptake in Latin America, but comparatively little uptake in Africa. And that is something I will come back again to. Here we see evidence of a sharp rise in political upheaval and regional conflict in the world commencing in around 2000, and a similar sharp rise in terrorist activity over the same period. The third observation of the literature review was that conflict determinants are broadly similar across case studies and confirm the rationale for classifying them into structural factors, contextual factors, and conflict drivers. These are examples of the conflict determinants as what emerged from the literature review. For instance, structural factors are the global commodity boom and investment in politically risky, underregulated countries. The rising social instability, which started in 2003, which we were just talking about. And the history of colonialism, authoritarian rule, and neoliberalism in those particular countries. In terms of contextual factors, examples are ill-designed and poorly implemented mineral development strategies by host governments, and weak governance capacity, rule of law, corruption, lack of transparency. In terms of conflict drivers, examples that came out of the literature, and there were many of them, inconsistent corporate social responsibility practices by companies and communities' willingness to use conflict as a negotiation tool. And we'll see more of that as the presentation proceeds. So as mentioned previously, I consider the field investigations to be the real heart of this study. They are, of course, logistically challenging and pose risks for the researchers at times. But in spite of Bernarda's tendency to work in dangerous situations, we are thankful we have her here to present today. So our objective is to investigate 18 case studies selected so that they collectively deliver a representative sample of conflict associated with mining operations globally. We decided to focus the majority of the case histories or the case studies in Latin America and Africa. And the reason for this is because these regions have attracted the majority of exploration and mining investment over the past 15 or 20 years. They are distinctly different politically, culturally, and historically. And they are in different stages of maturity with respect to the development of their mineral resources. And note that we are talking about structural and contextual factors here. So in phase 1 of our study, we've completed 4 of the 18 case studies. We selected 2 in Latin America and 2 in Africa. So in Latin America, we selected from Peru the Haquira project, which is a copper project. It's owned by First Quantum, and it's in the advanced exploration stage. And in the same region, we also looked at Las Bambas. This is a very large copper mine. It's owned by a Chinese organization called MMG. It's an open pit operation, and when we were there, it was under construction, but it has now started production. In Bolivia, we looked at the San Cristobal mine. This is a silver, lead, zinc mine. It's owned by a Japanese company, Sumitomo. It's also an open pit mine, and it's been operating for about 9 years. In Africa, in Tanzania, we looked at the Bulyanhulu gold mine. It's owned by Acacia Minerals, which is majority owned by Barrick Gold. It's an underground mine. It's been operating for about 20 years. And in Madagascar, we looked at the Ambaravi mine. It's a nickel mine, probably one of the largest suppliers of nickel in the world. It's owned by Sherritt International. It's an open pit mine, and it's been operating now for about 4 years. Is it 4 years, Mark? Something like that, okay. We selected the San Cristobal and Bulyanhulu projects as possible positive cases with respect to managing conflict, and you will see what we actually discovered later on in the presentation. During the development of our inventory of known conflict cases, it became quickly apparent that organized expressions of opposition to mining by local communities were common in Latin America, but comparatively rare in Africa. We are only able to identify 6 examples of conflicts associated with mining in Africa that involved sustained collective action in opposition to mining, compared to literally hundreds documented in Latin America. And this was an unexpected but interesting observation that I will come back to later on in the presentation. Oops. Okay. So, the Haquira and Las Bambas projects are located in southern Peru, up in the high Andes. They're up at about 4,000 meters. And as you can see, the closest community or small city is Cusco. You've probably heard of Cusco. Las Bambas and Haquira are less than 10 kilometers apart. And this is the Las Bambas project. In the top figure, you can see that it's very extensive. You can see location of the concentrator and the open pit, and the bottom photograph is a picture of the concentrator while it was still under construction and looking down the valley towards the open pit. And this is the Haquira project, and you can see up on the hillside a whole bunch of drill pads where they've been doing some exploration. So the San Cristobal mine is located in southern Bolivia, just a hop, skip, and a jump down the Andes from the Las Bambas and Haquira projects. As you can see, the San Cristobal mine occurs very close to, I think this is one of the largest salars in the world at that altitude. A salar is a salt flat. It's a large open pit mine, and that geodesic structure is something that they constructed to stop dust from getting into the air and getting down into the communities. The Bulyanhulu gold mine is located in Tanzania. It's located about 55 kilometers from Lake Victoria. The top photograph is a processing facility, and as you can see, it is an underground mine. The Ambaravi mine is located in Madagascar, as I noted before. The mine is actually in that particular location where it says Ambaravi, and the processing facility is in Tomasina, and it's connected by, a 200-kilometer pipeline, 220? Pipeline from the mine to the processing facility, and the ore is pumped as a slurry from the mine to the facility. Now, is that top photograph actually a picture of the open pit? Yes. Okay, because I wasn't sure. I had a hard time finding a picture of the open pit, and I was worried that it might be when they were constructing the actual processing plant location. Okay, that's good. And the bottom photograph is a picture of the very, very impressive processing facility. So, as I mentioned, we are dealing with significantly different structural environments in Latin America as compared to Africa. And this slide illustrates an important distinction with respect to political organization. As illustrated, most countries in Latin America are considered to be well along the way towards achieving some form of democracy. Whereas in Africa, with a few exceptions, most countries are still categorized as anocracies. So an anocracy is a combination of authoritarian rule and some elements of democracy, if it has some elements of democracy. This slide shows some key global indices relevant to our 4 case studies using Canada as a benchmark and for 2015. And using our terminology, we would consider these to be structural and contextual factors relevant to these jurisdictions. The poverty figures are recorded as a percent of population, and they are at the $1.90 a day or less, which is the worst, lowest category of poverty. And as we can see by looking at that poverty column, Madagascar has a very high level of poverty, and Tanzania is not too far behind, and the Latin American case studies are not in too bad shape with respect to that poverty categorization. The human development column is expressed as a ranking out of 188 countries. Again, you can see how Madagascar and Tanzania are not in too good a shape with regards to this. And the rest of them, government effectiveness, political stability, rule of law, and corruption control, are all expressed as percentile scores out of 100. So again, you can see how low Madagascar scores in governance effectiveness. Also in terms of political stability. Now, it's important to know that these numbers change with time due to a whole bunch of different factors. And the number in parenthesis under political stability for Madagascar is what the number was in 2010. And this was following a military coup that happened in Madagascar and resulted in a significant amount of political instability and social disruption. And I believe that was when Ambaravi was under construction in 2009 as well, a very challenging place to try and put a multi-billion-dollar mining operation in place. Under rule of law, again, we have Bolivia registering a very low figure here. And remember, this is a percentile figure out of 100. And again, we see that in 2010, that number in brackets for Madagascar was lower than it is now, and it's because of that military coup. And in terms of corruption control, all these jurisdictions are pretty low on that score and fairly comparable among them. Okay, so our field team consists of experienced social practitioners who have spent a lot of time of their professional careers conducting field work on conflict and social issues associated with mining projects. And they applied well-tested methodologies to acquire information based on initial desktop research followed by on-site interviews with relevant parties, including community members, local authorities, representatives of local, regional, central government, company personnel, local institutions, and civil society organizations. We left no stone unturned because interviewing a broad spectrum of people and institutions was key to obtaining a wide spectrum of perspectives and achieving objectivity with the study conclusions. So a total of about 90 days was spent in the field accumulating observations and data on the 4 case studies. And we gathered an enormous amount of information, which is documented in 4 detailed individual reports within the final report of phase 1. All of these were included in the phase 1 report, including a summary report of all the 4 cases, which brought them all together. So in designing this presentation, the challenge was to distill all of the information from the 4 case studies down into a reasonable level. So for the purposes of the phase 1 report, we developed what we refer to as conflict maps, one for each case study, as illustrated here, which allows the reader to examine the conflict history and the process of it in a single graphic, including the conflict determinants that you can see there, the roles of the key players, and the relationships and the connections among them. But these maps are too text-heavy to use in a presentation, and they don't allow a comparison of one case history to another. So in the next few slides, I've organized and summarized the information into some visuals, which I hope are effective in bringing out the key defining characteristics for each case study and also comparing them from one to the other. So, on this slide, we start with structural factors. And across the top, we have the 2 Latin American case studies. And on the bottom, we have the 2 African case studies. And what I have done here is the first 4 structural factors are the same for each country. Colonialism, neoliberalism, poverty, and corruption. But note that the colonialism that affected Latin American countries is different from that affected African countries. In particular, the timing. So the colonialism that affected African countries is much more recent than that in Latin America. And they are still feeling the effects of that. They are still there. Point number 5, we have partial democracy, as I mentioned before, in Latin American countries, and anocracy in African countries, a combination of authoritarian rule and some elements of democracy in some countries. What the red lettering indicates is where a particular country is unique compared to the others. So in the case of the Haquira Las Bambas situation, the Shining Path, the terrorist group, was active in that particular region. And there was a lot of pretty brutal fighting that was happening between Shining Path and the Peruvian government at the time. In Bolivia, it's a very unique situation. They have what they call mining cooperatives. These traditionally, historically, were made up of artisanal and small-scale miners. But in the mid-'80s, Comibol, a state mining company in Bolivia, shut down a lot of its tin operations. And as a result, there was a large number of unemployed miners, and they got absorbed into the cooperatives. And the cooperatives have become a very powerful influence in Bolivia, both positive and negative influences. But they have helped, in some ways, to prepare the country for the large-scale mining industry, which I'll refer to in a second. In Africa, and we're looking at the Tanzania situation, we have the tribal system, which is historically very significant in African countries. And in Madagascar, again, we have extremely low level of governance effectiveness. So those are some of the structural factors. They're not all of them. I have selected some of them for, basically they are the key ones. So next we move to contextual factors. As you can see, the slides are getting a little bit busier because we're going down in the conceptual framework. So again, the first three of these are the same for three of the case studies, in Peru, in Tanzania, and Madagascar. So what they are is a lack of strategic approach to mineral development by these countries and a lack of preparation of society for foreign direct investment and the large-scale mining industry. The second is a central government control that exists here. It's a central government control and decision-making and poorly designed decentralization processes. And government policies designed in favor of the mining companies as opposed to the citizens of the country. So what was unique to the Haquira Las Bambas case is ineffective policies and measures for conflict prevention. They actually had policies and measures, but they actually produced more conflict than actually reducing it. In the case of Tanzania and Bulyanhulu, the unique features there was that the government encouraged artisanal and small-scale miners and informed them that Tanzanians own their own resources. And you'll see the significance of that in the next slide. And also there is, in that country, the history of strong oppression of people by police and the government. In the case of Madagascar and the Ambaravi project, again, we see weak governance and a high level of political instability, especially when the mine was being constructed. And again, strong oppression of people by the army and the government. When we look at Bolivia and San Cristobal, this is where the Bolivia and the San Cristobal case study starts to depart from the other three. Here we have government and society better prepared for foreign direct investment and the large-scale mining industry. And I attribute that to two things: the presence of the cooperatives, the mining cooperatives that had such a huge influence in the country and still does, and the fact that they've been mining in Bolivia for centuries. In this case, decentralization was well designed and successfully implemented. That was back in the 90s. There is a balanced approach by central government to the governance of mineral development, and local communities were well prepared and supportive of mineral development. So next, conflict drivers, and this is the most text-heavy of these series of slides, but again, we're moving down the conceptual framework where things get more detailed as you go from the top to the bottom. In this case, I have color-coded the role of government, communities, and companies, as you can see. So, conflict drivers. The government, lack of coordination among central government agencies dealing with conflict prevention. Poorly designed dialogue tables. They did have dialogue tables, but the way they designed and implemented them, they didn't work. And unresolved land use and ownership issues in the area where the mining operations are located. In terms of the communities, they had developed a deep mistrust of government. They are fragmented, and there's competition over land rights amongst the communities. And there's an asymmetry of distribution of benefits from the mining operations, which they are very uncomfortable with. And they use conflict as a tactic in negotiations. They have no problem with that. With respect to the company, there's been a change in ownership and management approach, which has affected their relationship with the communities, and you'll see a little bit more about that later. There has been selective engagement with the communities, and there's been a flawed selective decision-making process. So that's how they contributed to conflict drivers. With the Bulyanhulu project in Tanzania, the central government appoints local authorities. So they have maintained authoritarian rule down to the local level by doing that. So they really haven't accomplished any kind of real decentralization. The artisanal and small-scale miners on the property where Bulyanhulu now exists were evicted to make way for the large-scale mining industry. In this particular case, Sutton Resources, who owned the property originally. And as I showed you in the previous slide, they had gone a lot of effort to encourage artisanal and small-scale miners and let them know that they own their own mineral resources. So this was a real reversal. And the company well-being is a priority over that of the communities. In terms of communities, the people there tend, in this particular location, Bulyanhulu, tend to be passive and non-confrontational. But they have an underlying deep resentment because of that eviction. And basically they think they took our gold, that they being both the government and this foreign company that came in. But they have a deep dependency on the company and at the same time a dissatisfaction with the benefits. So they have an us versus them attitude. And so it is a passive-aggressive kind of environment, and it's uncooperative and rather subversive as well. With regards to the company, they are perceived to be complicit with the eviction of the artisanal and small-scale miners and the apparent burial of 40 of those artisanal miners during that eviction, which was never corroborated, but it still exists as a reality in the minds of local people. There have been frequent turnovers of the mine manager, 13 in 17 years, resulting in a very inconsistent approach to the workers and the communities. With respect to Ambaravi, the government is authoritarian, and there's a frequent role in the use of the military, and this causes fear of reprisals to organized opposition. And the mine construction coincided with a military coup, as mentioned before. With respect to the communities, in general, Malagasy people are patient, tolerant, nonviolent, but we detected that frustration is slowly building. They don't trust government, they're deeply dependent on the company, and they feel that the commitments by the company have not been met. And there's also a frustration with respect to revenue distribution. In terms of the company's contribution to conflict drivers, they allowed the Catholic Church to assume an advocacy role, and some people believe that that got in between the government and the communities, and it wasn't a very constructive situation. There was a change in management during construction, and as a result, there was the establishment of a transactional approach to community relations that the operating team that's now in place are having to deal with, which is not a very good situation, not an easy situation. So finally, we get to conflict triggers. So in the Hakira Las Bambas case, there was a bilateral decision made between company and the central government involving how they were going to move the ore from the mine to the processing plant. They changed it from a pipeline to trucks. And this decision left out the communities. And that's really what triggered the outbreak of conflict there that resulted in 4 deaths and quite a number of injuries. In Bolivia, there have been conflicts with respect to the San Cristobal project, but the relationship is so resilient that they've always bounced back and reestablished that relationship because the communities believe, and the company believes, that that relationship is much more valuable than what they try and get from the conflicts. And those conflicts were triggered by the company not living up, at least perceived by the communities, not living up to its commitments. There was a conflict situation in 2000 and 2011, but that relationship is still very healthy. In Tanzania, at the Bulyanhulu project, there's no conflict outbreak yet, but there's long-standing resentment and passive aggression. But the conflict has been contained. In the case of Madagascar, there's no conflict outbreak yet as well, but there's a high level of dependency on the company and a heightened expectation of what the company can deliver, and this fuels a significant increase in conflict potential. So far, it has been contained. So, I know that it was a lot of information, and I hope you've been able to assimilate at least some of it. What I've done with that series is try to illustrate some elements of this connectivity and causal relationship. And actually, what I should say, what I did with that series is I tried to compare the conflict determinants among the 4 case studies. So on this diagram, I've tried to illustrate some elements of the connectivity and causal relationships that happen in any particular case study that I wasn't able to show in that previous slide series. As you can see, I've reproduced the main categories of conflict determinants which define this case and indicate the main players on the basis of color coding, as you can see on the top right-hand side of the diagram. So structural factors give rise to contextual factors, which in turn give rise to conflict drivers, which then the triggers for outbreak of conflict arrive from both conflict drivers and the contextual factors. So neoliberalism and partial democratization has contributed to income disparity, urban versus rural dwellers, and also adds fuel to the fire of lack of trust of government. The activities of Shining Path and the brutal conflict that occurred with Shining Path and the Peruvian government really caused the communities to become fragmented and competitive and prone to using conflict when they feel like they're being threatened. The lack of trust in government also contributed to the nature of the communities there. All of those contextual factors in red contributed to a lack of trust of government by the communities. And all of these conflict drivers in red contributed again to the fact that the communities are fragmented, competitive, and prone to using conflict. And this was also accentuated by the company who used selective partial consultation, and also the problem with respect to asymmetrical benefits distribution. Some communities were getting benefits more than others. So what we see here is the interconnectivity and hierarchy of conflict determinants and a relationship among the players involved. And what this all leads to is the actions and behaviors of the players at the company-community interface and the form of conflict that occurs there. Kernahan, how are we doing on time? I mean,
we're doing great. I don't know, can you give all of us a kind of an indication of your overall trajectory of your just in terms of time?
About 10 more minutes, but then I'm cutting into Bernarda's time.
Okay, and Bernarda, and your...
I'll try to be faster.
Okay, I will too, although...
2-hour overall time period, and we do have questions coming in from other parts of the globe. And I'm sure there are some very cool people here in the room who might very well want to say something. So if you can bear that in mind, I will let you and Bernarda manage your time accordingly, but there are some questions.
Okay, I feel that I'm going to be in big trouble after this, but anyway. So, as I said before, in the previous slide, it basically led up to the company-community interface and the form of the conflict that occurs there. And this figure that we have up now leads us back to our normative model, where we can graphically display the nature of the conflict at the community-company interface of our 4 case studies and the behavior of the players involved. So, for the Hakira and Las Bambas project, this is where they reside. They reside in the field of activism. And I think most people who have looked at Las Bambas would agree that when Xstrata, a Canadian company or former Canadian company, owned the project, they were in the field of coexistence. Things were quite good between the communities and the company. But since they changed to MMG, things have deteriorated, and this is where they are now. San Cristobal is definitely in the dialogue and collaboration field of coexistence, but it has had its conflicts, and it's moved into that area of activism. But because of the depth and resilience of that relationship, it's always moved back to coexistence. And Bulyanhulu and Ambarabi are down in here. We see Bulyanhulu as having a foot in each one of these fields. And Ambarabi we see it in the passive-aggressive field. The danger is that both of those can move into the field of activism if the people start to realize or feel for some reason that they have a higher ability to influence. So as a preface to summarizing our observations and conclusions in phase 1, I would remind you that this study is a work in progress. And we have amassed a considerable amount of data, and we are excited with the direction this is taking. However, I would still characterize our observations and conclusions at this point as preliminary and needing collaboration, and this will happen hopefully when we do phase 2 of our study. The high-level observations, in summary, is that first, the rising conflict associated with mining in that period of time is directly linked to the rise in global mining activity during this time. Second, the rising conflict has occurred within the context of a widespread resurgence of social instability and protest intensity driven by multiple and profound transformations worldwide. And third, organized opposition to mining is rare in Africa compared to Latin America. And this is due, we suspect, primarily to the differences in history of colonialism between the two regions, the fact that anarchy is still dominant in Africa versus democracy in Latin America. So there is still severe oppression of organized opposition in Africa, and the existence of the tribal system, characteristic of many African countries. And the tribal system is in itself an authoritarian system that has discouraged local political entrepreneurialism and organized movements of the community. So that's what we feel about that. So our study to date indicates that conflict associated with mining is not simply an event involving only companies and communities at the sites of operations, but it's a process that has a history, a pathway, and multiple players with roles and responsibilities in the creation and prevention, the creation or prevention of conflict. And what the conflict process can be understood on the basis of this conceptual framework that's illustrated here that enables conflict determinants, the players involved, and their interrelationships to be understood in a systematic way, and for multiple conflict cases to be examined on a comparative basis. And while companies and communities are important players in conflict, I believe we have shone some light on the importance of host governments throughout the conflict continuum, but in particular at the contextual level, and their contribution to the formation of the enabling environment for either conflict creation or conflict prevention. Obviously, there are other players involved in conflict processes, but we believe that in the majority of cases, host governments, communities, and companies are the dominant players. And we will be examining the roles of the other players as we move forward into phase 2. So it's never good enough to just understand the symptoms of something that is happening in the present moment. One needs to understand the underlying process and pathway that has led us up to that moment in order to find the most effective treatment. We believe that this line of investigation has implications for the policies and strategic decisions of host governments towards natural resource development, and the approach of companies, the approach that companies take towards due diligence and risk assessment prior to going in country, and their practices and approaches to stakeholder relations and conflict prevention once in the country. So I realize that this has been a lot of information for you to take in, so a very special thank you for your attention and your patience. And stay tuned for phase 2. And Bernardo will now present some insights on the Latin American case studies, and my apologies for narrowing down your available time.
Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so Tony asked me to, given that there was such a wealth of information, to present not only further information or detailed information, but also some anecdotes of the trips that I had to both Bolivia and Peru. So as the criteria that we had to choose the different case studies that we would study, we decided to include some criteria that would allow us to see some examples that would help us to find some positive outcomes and others that would be the negative outcomes. So following the criteria, we chose the MMGs Las Bambas in Peru. And we made all sort of logistic arrangements, and part of these logistic arrangements included having appointments with the government representatives as well that were not easy to make. So one night before I was about to take the plane to go to Peru, the company contacts Tony and they say, please abort the mission. So I was faced with this situation in which I thought, well, what should we do? Should we just let it go? But at the end, we decided to go ahead and go to Peru and see what we could do. But once we did that, we were very, very lucky that Akira, that First Quantum, allowed us to go and study their site. But with almost every interview we conducted locally, including staff members from the Akira project, Las Bambas was mentioned or brought up to our attention as it had very high influence in the area. Without planning, we analyzed the dynamics of a company having lots of influence, a company being very close to it. Given the proximity of both companies, the reference point for community members on social, economic, and environmental matters usually was Las Bambas, for as both projects shared the same communities in their areas of direct and indirect impact. So to get to the Akira project, I went through the scariest road that I've ever been. I thought that was going to be my last trip of them all. It was a windy two-way road with the width of for only one car. I felt I was like in a roller coaster. The only problem was that this ride took 7 hours. The road to get to the Akira, well, and let me show you. Maybe it would work. The driver put some salsa music to calm my nerves down, so you could see the road there. The scariest part was that we didn't know if a car was coming very fast from the other side, and if so, they would push us down to the precipice. It was incredibly scary. You can't hear the salsa music, but there it was. They tried to calm down my nerves. Well, finally, after those 7 hours of fear, I arrived to the Akira project with a little bit of altitude sickness because I was at almost 4,000 meters above sea level. Please note that the following slides, given the time limitations I have, I will make emphasis to the community relations, company community relations, because I took pictures of that journey. The key stakeholders on this case study were many. Each one of them, as Tony said, had their roles and responsibilities on the scene. But please pay attention to different factors I will mention that will give you an idea on how the context environment plays an important role as well. Keep in mind that the social, political, and economic aspects around the Akira Las Bambas projects. In addition, I will point out some context information regarding a series of conflict events in the area. So Las Bambas' most recent conflict situation occurred in March 2016, when two local communities had a confrontation due to their concerns about wealth distribution. Each community had different opinions on how their land would be politically divided to get more royalty benefits from the canon minero. The canon minero is a Peruvian revenue sharing mechanism created in 1992 to allocate a percentage of the income of the tax generated by mining companies to the territory where the taxes are generated, according to the population and unsatisfied basic needs. The main objective of the mechanism is to contribute to public investment projects. So on September 29th of 2015, the communities from Las Bambas area of the direct and indirect areas of direct and indirect impact participated on a conflict when approximately 800 members from various communities from the area of the external area and the internal area gathered to join a protest that escalated into violence and resulted in 3 deaths and 28 wounded. A diverse range of stakeholders provided a variety of reasons what triggered that conflict. According to some community members, the trigger was the lack of consultation on the construction of a new molybdenum plant and the fear of contamination. According to other community members, the reason behind the protest was to protest the company for more local jobs and service contracts. So it all depends on who you talk to. Cahuanhuire was one of the communities I visited and one of the communities that is around the area of direct impact of the Akira project. In view of the new economic developments in the area due to mining activities, the potential for getting benefits from royalties, employment, and services, and witnessing how local communities located in the area of direct impact from Las Bambas, this has improved, and how can these improve their access to benefits? Many families have returned after 20 years to the Akira project area of direct impact. Lawani is another community around the area of direct impact. I covered the face of the person I was interviewing because I thought that it was important to preserve the anonymity of the person I was talking to. So that's the reason why they are covered, in cases when you can see who I'm talking directly to. So as part of our conversation, a community member from Lawani mentioned that they would like to have more information from the company to learn about the company's decision to stop operations for 2 years. The company said that they would stop these operations and for 2 years, and indeed they would do that, but they were having different messages from different people, from different company staff members. So the community was expecting the company to take these 2 years of parenthesis to work on capacity building process, to prepare the communities for future job positions within the company. What they said was, we want to be prepared. They also said, we wouldn't like to be deceived. We would not like to be harmed. We would like to have access to jobs. If that would be the case, we would be happy. At the moment, only 8 community members have a job maintaining a greenhouse the company has built for the community. Each community from the area of direct impact negotiates and relates to the company individually. Community members are usually united when it comes to protest, but not when it comes to negotiate with the company. They also said the government should help us to have our rights respected. Community members have returned with expectations from the company. They would like to receive a benefit, as I said. In Lawani, 40 families were reported in 2010, in the 2010 census, but 115 families were reported in 2014. So you can see how that migration started to become part of the scene after knowing that they could receive some benefits. In Huanacopampa, on the right side, you can see here the campsite of the Akira project, and here is Huanacopampa. So people at the Huanacopampa mentioned that they welcome the company, even though they don't have much job opportunities. They were informed that they will need to be relocated, and they don't object to it. They prefer the company to take its time to initiate operations, because they were told that the company will take 2 years. And they said it's better that way because then we'll have more time to be in peace. But they also have problems with other communities. Huanacopampa has a deteriorating relationship with the community of Paranani that I'll show you afterwards. According to members of Huanacopampa, Paranani is disputing a land that belongs to them. We have land ownership issues, they said. The 2010 census for Huanacopampa reported 25 families, while the 2014 census indicated the presence of 125 families. On the pictures, you can see community members of Paranani practicing the traditional collective sewing called aini. It's a Quechua word that means today for you, tomorrow for me. So the families gather together and they plant what they need to collectively to help each other. The population growth following a similar pattern as the other communities in the area of direct impact and indirect impact. In Paranani, it was observed that the number of families increased from 90 to 163 in 2015. Regarding the land ownership issues, Paranani's residents claim that the land is their traditional land. In addition, there's an airport located in the disputed land. I'll show you. So in this part, this is part of the airport landing place. And this is the area that they're disputing. One says that it's there because legally it's theirs, and the other one say no, it's traditionally ours. But it also happens that this area belongs to another district called El Progreso, which belongs to another province of Grau. As a Paranani resident explained, before mining activities took place in the area, both communities shared the land for grazing. But now they confront each other because economic interests are at stake. Younger people from Huanacopampa would like to be part of Chalhuahuacho. Chalhuahuacho, these two pictures are from Chalhuahuacho, located in Cotabambas. Due to their proximity to Chalhuahuacho, these young people say that they can be seen as socially accepted because they are in a bigger city. They also see it as a better opportunity to receive the canon minero by being under Chalhuahuacho's territorial jurisdiction. Chalhuahuacho is the district capital of the same name that has become the center of commerce in the area. Up until 2007, it was a sleepy settlement with thatched roofs, similar to many other communities in the area and the other pictures I showed you. The proximity to Las Bambas and its location in the project area of the direct impact has turned Chalhuahuacho into a boom town. As construction activity at Las Bambas peaks, people flood into Chalhuahuacho. The streets are teeming with workers making their way through the town's unpaved streets. Every second building is either a store, a restaurant, a clothes washing facility, or a shop selling mining clothes. 2 to 5-story buildings serve as hotels, hostels, or guest houses for the many hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers in the town. A local journalist and the mayor calculated that Chalhuahuacho is continuously growing and may have as many as 300 hotels and 200 restaurants. And as you can see, Chalhuahuacho goes from here to here only. The Las Bambas project is building a separate town for permanent workers closer to the mine, creating economic uncertainty for the hotels and services in Chalhuahuacho. This picture is just to show you the ethnic group that is living in this area. And here you see that coming from the town of Akira, going through this road, you could see all these grazing lands, a small community here with the usual communities that are here. People practicing the aini, the collective planting process that they have. And here, I wonder if somebody knows or can distinguish what this is. In the middle of the Andes. I'll show you a closer picture. So that is Fuerabamba Alta. It's a relocated community from Las Bambas. And this is Huanacopampa, the community that was asked to relocate when La Quira starts its operations. As you can see, these are large houses and it's a gated community as well, developed by the company. And when I asked the community members from Huanacopampa if they would, given that they see what's happening at Fuerabamba Alta, that is so close by, I asked them, so you think you would ask the same as Fuerabamba did? And they said, the answer was surprising. They said, Fuerabamba is sad because they are incarcerated on their own land, which is because it's a gated community. But we're happy cultivating our potatoes and grazing our animals. He said, look at around us. We have no gates. The money dries up. It's sad. The people from Fuerabamba cry. We're used to living in the countryside. That was the opinion of one person from Huanacopampa. So here are more pictures of Fuerabamba Alta. That is, and each one of these houses, I thought, okay, there are like 1, 2, 3 families living on each floor, but it turns out that each one of these houses were individual houses for individual families. So they were very large houses. And what was very surprising, and these are the people that you can see on the street. I didn't see dogs, but I saw these sheep grazing here. And this was these little houses you could see when you went out of the gated community. You came down here and you could see these. So the disparities, the gap between what some communities have and what others that have a lot of attention from the company have was very big. What called my attention as well was that these houses, most of these houses had these small huts with where they had a table, and some of them even had a kitchen in here, and people like to sit down on the floor and have some sun, and with their dog there, they are not in the house. And I asked, well, why is that? And they say, well, it's because we're used to be like this better than being in a big house. So they were trying to accommodate to the new way of living, and also because most of them have practiced the Aini as well, and the land that they cultivate is not there. So the cultural shock was a little bit big. But some others were very happy. It all depended on who you talk to as well. The school was one of the largest schools and complete schools I've ever seen. They had from before kindergarten, when you just take care of child care center, to young people that were prepared to go to university. And they also had a community hall, and you can see here that people from the company make sure that the community is clean. So they're the ones who clean the streets, not the community members. See, here are some quotes from the interviewees, and these were some quotes about relationships. I will refer to some of them, not all of them, because the time is running short. For example, they said, the repercussion of Las Bambas over the Kira project is fear, to have rights breached. Some people fear that the same situation will be repeated with the Akira project, referring to the conflict situation that they had. Community member. This was mentioned by a community member from the area of direct impact. There were other quotes related to wealth distribution. For example, one of them said, an NGO said, the differences in wealth between communities that receive benefits from the company and those that don't create envy and internal conflicts. A community member said, just a handful of communities receive benefits, but the rest of the communities don't. How can someone hungry see others eat so much? It is unfair. We all want to receive benefits. While the Resistance Committee, which was a committee that was against mining pretty strongly, they said, locally, neoliberal ideas have prevailed since colonial times. In the past, communities were more united and ensured that all 33 communities receive benefits, not only a handful of communities. Most communities receive just leftovers. Those who speak about equality are called anti-miners and terrorists. While other comments that were more positive or more looking for solutions would say, it would help if the mayor would work efficiently with community members to plan and manage the use of those resources, referring to the canon minero. While somebody else said, there's no integral management of economic resources. That was the Peruvian ombudsman. In the political arena, there were some proposals to divide the land into different districts. As I said before, the canon minero is distributed according to the politically divided area. So if one district would decide to divide in two, then they would say that that district would receive 20%. But if they divide into two, one would get 10 and the other one would get the other 10%. And some of them said, yes, with the 10%, we can do whatever we want. And the others would say, no, why would you do it if that would only divide us, or that wouldn't allow us to do projects that would be higher impact projects, long-term projects with more amount of money that we could have. So it was a big debate that they had. So as you saw, I mostly spoke about the community and the company relationship. But there are many other stakeholders at different levels. At the local level, you had the Akira's project staff, Las Bambas project staff, small business people, the municipality, the Resistance Committee, communities in the area of direct impact, communities located outside the area of direct impact. At the regional level and at the national level, we had the governor's office, the Peruvian ombudsman, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, the Ministry of Environment, the Presidency of Council of Ministers. Each one of them played a very important role in conflict or preventing conflict, just like Tony mentioned. So now let's go very quickly to the field case study of Bolivia. And this was the case that helped to see how a positive. Yeah, thank you. I'll be as quick as I can. So well, I'll be very short here. So the San Cristobal case was a positive case. The local culture includes gods and spirits with a profound respect for the earth, and rocks in particular. Among these, perhaps the most well-known god is El Tío, who, as described by locals, lives in the black interior of mountains guarding the precious veins of gold and silver. El Tío, according to the legend, promised that he had hidden a gift for those who continued to believe in him. And the legend says that the gift would be unveiled in the year 2000. It turns out that this deposit was discovered in 1996. So the locals thought that perhaps this was El Tío revealing that was what they were getting back for believing in him. So this marked a relevant starting point for the company and local communities, where the communities wanted the mine, knowing about the promise of El Tío, and the company viewed the deposit as a great opportunity. But we also have ups and downs in this relationship, as we will see. So this is a view of the area coming on the plane. As you can see, it was a very deserted area. And prior to the San Cristobal mine, and the reason I put this picture here was just to explain that before the discovery of the mine, people had a very hard time living in this area because they had to walk for 120 kilometers to reach Uyuni, which was the largest city closest to them, and they only had transportation once a week, so it was very difficult for them to find ways to develop economically. So many families, almost all of them, would leave the area and would go to other countries or other places that are nearby, like Chile and Argentina. I was incredibly lucky to have the opportunity to cross the Uyuni Salar to visit Colchacá, the provincial capital that emerged prosperous in 2010, when local authorities managed to apply mining royalties to the provision of basic needs, such as electricity, drinking water, and production projects in order to diversify the local economy. I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like out of this planet. It was an amazing place. And we had to cross almost like for 2 hours through this salar, which is the Salar de Uyuni. The driver said that we could make some tricks with your camera in the salar, so I gave it a try, and you can see in these pictures what I did. I was jumping not very high, very little, but it seems like I am jumping very high. Well, the municipal authorities acknowledged the need for capacity building and economic development to help 45 communities located within the jurisdiction. And 4 out of the 45 communities were located in the area of direct impact. These were San Cristobal, Vila Vila, Culpinacá, and Rio Grande. These communities said, well, we don't need exclusivity, but we do need priority. So this helped to bring the other communities into the process of sharing the benefits as well. So having the wealth distributed a little bit more equally, at least to have the basic needs covered, some local communities developed some touristic places like this one. This was a small hotel, and all you can see here was made with salt from the salar. Everything, including the beds, the floor, the chairs, the night tables, absolutely everything was made with salt. So it was an incredible opportunity for them. And if you have the opportunity to go there, it would be great to contribute and help these local communities develop their projects. I'll just go through these pictures of the communities. As you can see, Rio Grande, Vila Vila, they were all part of the negotiation process, and the process allowed the company to go from withholding and withdrawal to a process of co-ownership. At a certain point, the communities referred to the relationship with the company as a marriage. Prior to the marriage, the communities held several assemblies for 6 months. They said, we didn't take any decisions in the beginning. We just continued our conversations to the point where we were able to reach collective agreements. The internal agreements between communities were not easy, as there was some skepticism. The communities requested the company build some internal capacity to help them make their final decisions. The company offered specialized professionals to explain the mining process as well as details about the relocation. From the company's point of view, the relationship with the communities was complex because the communities would not distinguish between the institutional relationship and labor issues. The institutional relationship was vague because members of the community relations team had built personal relationships with communities. This close relationship resulted in demands by the community. And as I said before, they were referring us to a marriage relationship, and they said the company and the community established a marriage relationship where the baby was the mine. So we both have to take care of it as mother and father. And we have problems like any married couple. This was mentioned by a community member of San Cristobal. Here is just a slide made by Ian Thompson and Robert Boutillier. It shows you that the social license to operate, you can gain it at a certain point, go through a legitimate to credibility and gain trust. But a situation could lead, a trigger could lead to bring you from the trusted relationship and bring the credibility down up to the point in which you lose legitimacy, and you can regain this trust but sometimes you just go up to the level of credibility and you cannot reach the level of trust again. In this case, this diagram, there were different events and triggers that made this happen, and this happened up to 2008. But I would like to make reference to the latest event that happened in 2011, very quickly. Oh, this is San Cristobal. When the company was going to build the mine, they had to relocate the community, and this is the relocated community. The request from San Cristobal community members, the main request was two main requests. One was that they would have to move the church with the same materials as they had in their community. So they did, and almost practically rock by rock, they built the same model, the same church as they had before. So this showed the community members that the company was trying to be respectful of their needs. And the conflict situation happened from a latent conflict, as the company had some pending matters in order to comply with the agreement known as the Mother Agreement. 20 community members were chosen by an assembly to hold these, to develop these relationship with the company and come up to an agreement that would help both communities and company to be all happy. But the company, when they changed of ownership, they failed to comply with these commitments, and what started as a concern for improved medical attention included a cascade of events that escalated into a conflict situation consisting of a prolonged strike and an 11-day blockade of the mine. The conflict trigger was the death of Pablo Calcina. Pablo Calcina was a very well-respected community member who had his child ill, and he asked the company to if he could use the ambulance and to take his son to the nearest health area. And the company said, no, we can't give you the ambulance, we'll give you a car and a chauffeur. But this was an old car and an unexperienced chauffeur. So on the way, on the road to Uni, which looks very similar to this one, this is the road to Uni, which wasn't in this state before, it was in very bad conditions at that time. Given that how inexperienced this driver was, they had an accident, and Pablo Calcina died in this accident. So the communities were very angry about that, because they said, we asked you to comply with the health, with the medical facilities, and you didn't, and on top of that, you gave us something that wasn't useful. So as a result of the conflict, they and all these events, they had improved the infrastructure for medical attention, ambulances, and improvements to the road. Community leaders lost their political power. The union emerged as the voice of the workers in social matters. The company community dynamic changed as institutionalized community relations approach developed and was formalized, resulting in a power shift favoring the company. Prior to this, the community had a great deal of power, and the company felt that it was giving into the community. Vila Vila gains political power and creates a foundation for productive projects. Culpina Ka takes further steps towards the development of productive projects. But local communities mourned the days when the relationship with the company had no third parties involved. The company and community signed a peace and harmony memorandum of understanding to avoid this situation from happening again. The document includes detailed information with steps describing how to manage any conflict situation in the future. And ever since 2011, they haven't had any conflict situation again. Well, I will skip this one that you can see on our report, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much, Bernard. I guess what this shows is that there's a great deal of information, and there's a phase 2 coming, so we're going to have to invite you back for phase 2, where you can elaborate on what you said here. There's been some questions from far away, and I know there's also an incredible wisdom and doubtless questions here in the room as well, but there's some that I can quickly answer myself. One is, where can I find more information on this? I will post more information when I get it from Tony. Second question was a question with respect to what is anocracy, and I can quickly give you the definition of that. It is a government regime featuring inherent qualities of political instability and ineffectiveness, as well as an incoherent mix of democratic and autocratic traits and practices. A third question has to do with whether or not there is a separation between surface rights and subsurface rights in all four of the case studies that you were looking at. And another question was from the UK was, I think it's all very interesting, but I'm slightly struggling to grasp what is new with what is being presented. Conflicts are complicated, have deep historical roots, can be exacerbated by local leadership and company behaviors. This we all knew. So what's new from this project, or am I just being unfair, as it's only really at the early finding stage? So those are the questions, and those came from Chile, UK, West Coast, and those are the ones I've been able to kind of quickly project to you, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to hand things back to Tony and Bernardo if you want to kind of quickly answer that, and then I'm afraid, sorry to say, that we're going to have to call it a day for today, but please come back for part 2, where we'll have more time to discuss this fascinating work. And on behalf of the Ryerson Sister Institute, thank you so much for your initial findings. Did you want to quickly respond to these?
So the answer of whether or not the mineral rights are severed from the surface rights, in all of these 4 case studies, the answer is yes. And that creates that's a conflict driver in and of itself. Because a lot of the people that live in these remote places are customary owners of the land, if you want to call them that, and they're on the surface and the mineral rights are below. And the government often removes them from the surface in order to allow large-scale mining companies to exploit the resources. What was, there was another? What's new? Okay. Well, this is a preliminary part of our study. So we're in the really initial stages of it. But I think what's new is that the systematic conceptual model of looking at conflict, because prior to this, every case was looked at individually at the site where it's happened. And I believe that what we've come out with is a way of looking at it systematically, not pretending that all of these things are exactly the same. They're not. They have differences. But there's a way of approaching them where you can better understand and better compare them. And I think the other thing that we've shone some light on is the role of government, host governments. And yeah, people knew that somewhere in there, host governments had a role to play. But the focus of attention was on companies and communities and at the company-community interface. And that's where a lot of previous attention has been focused, and at the expense of looking at, for instance, the role of government. So I think it's very, very important that we document how government is implicated in these conflict processes.
Thank you so much, Tony, for quickly doing that. Bernard, did you have a quick response as well? We are in overtime, to use hockey language.
Yeah, very shortly. I would say that something else that is new is that usually conflicts are seen as the company and community and perhaps government in some instances, or NGOs. But know that there are many other players that play a role as well in conflict or preventing conflict. Each one of them have their role and responsibility, and that each one of us as well can play a role into preventing conflict. That the study, I think, shows us how each one of us can be contributors to preventing conflict as well.
Thank you very much. This is the last talk before the holidays, so I want to wish everybody well. And there will be many more talks coming up in the new year. So all the best for the holiday season.